Have you ever thought that the world is going mad? That it's lurching from crisis to crisis? That common sense and rationality seem to have vanished? Is the world out of control? Or is it perhaps under the control of people we cannot control? What's really going on? For those who want to look behind the headlines and hear the questions asked which no one dares ask, this is the Laughland Report.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the Laughland Report. It's a great honour and pleasure for me to have here in the Amsterdam studio Professor Paul Cliteur.
Thank you.
Who I think we can perhaps describe as the intellectual godfather of FVD, having been the supervisor.
Oh, you make me blush.
the Doktorvater, as we say in German, or perhaps you say it in Dutch as well.
Yeah.
The supervisor, anyway, of Thierry Baudet.
Yeah.
You are a professor of law, of jurisprudence at Leiden University.
Retired now.
You've been a senator. And one of your main areas of interest is you've written articles and books about free speech and the threat to free speech from terrorism. And you've sent me a number of pieces written about the Rushdie affair, about the murder of the Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh, and about all the other cases that we know about. There are lots of debates about free speech all the time. You know, people say, well, you know, if you don't allow this, so why, you know, we all, and you've said this in your writings, you know, we all agree that there are limits on free speech. So I thought I'd try to avoid that aspect of the debate. My first reaction in reading you was, yes, the Muslim threat is absolutely obvious because it has taken such very violent forms, the Charlie Hebdo murders and so on, the Rushdie attack.
Right.
But I get the impression that the threats to free speech now are far greater than they were when you were writing these books a few years ago. The situation has, you identified the problem and you've identified one of the sources, but now, after COVID, after the Ukraine war, after the Kaag affair in the Tweede Kamer, there are the walls of free speech seem to be closing in from all angles, not just from the Muslims. Is that your view as well?
Absolutely, yes. Of course, freedom of speech is of course much broader than what I described in the books that you mentioned, but that's true. But I was particularly interested in the tension between free speech and violence.
Yes.
And when I started thinking about this issue, that was in a serious manner, I think, in 2002, when Pim Fortuyn, by the way, was killed by an environmental terrorist, or an extreme left-wing figure. So that was the first thing that was very interesting and a great threat to free speech. But 2 years later, there was the Van Gogh killing, and the murder of Pim Fortuyn, Volkert van der G is his name, Volkert van der Graaf. He has not so much nachwuchs. I mean, there is not so much extreme left-wing people who are killing people for the things that they say. But when I started reading about the Islamist threat and about Islamist ideology, that was in a sense much more a bigger threat, and I had the feeling that this would be great. And that was 2004, and then you get in 2005, you get the Danish cartoon affairs, and then 10 years later you get the complete killing of the whole editorial board of Charlie Hebdo and Samuel Paty in France, and it doesn't end. And
it's in a category of its own.
Right.
There's no doubt. And the Muslim angle or the Islamist angle is accompanied, as you say, with these terrible acts of violence.
Yeah.
But we see with cancel culture, we see with the whole fight against disinformation, which turns out very often not to be disinformation.
Yes.
We see an absolutely catastrophic situation. Liberal societies which are obsessively liberal about moral issues, have become more and more illiberal about the basic building blocks of liberal society, which of course include, perhaps above all, freedom of speech.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, in a way, I suppose when I was reading you, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating, I thought, there is the issue of Islamic terrorism on which is a subject of its own, and then there is the issue of free speech and what the boundaries should be of free speech.
Yeah.
And we would have that debate about free speech, whether or not there was Islamic terrorism.
Absolutely. Sure. The only thing is what I became fascinated, especially by the threat of Islamic terrorism, because it's so insidious in a sense that people don't notice it. You have so many people nowadays who say, "Well, why should you offend people?" And no, we're still completely free.
Yeah.
They do not recognize that basically a certain area of topics is completely off the table. You simply do not discuss that anymore, and a lot of people they exercise self-censorship. They do not even imagine to publish a cartoon or something that could be related to the satanic verses of Rushdie, and it's also and it goes on and on. 33 years after the fatwa in 1989, and still the man has to lose the control of his arm and one eye. It's so.
No, there's absolutely
it has a tremendous effect.
It has such a tremendous effect that I was tempted to say on reading you that Islamic terrorism connected with speech acts.
Right.
It seems to me, is the only effective terrorism. Because if you fly planes into the World Trade Center, America does not abandon its neoconservative foreign policy. If you put a bomb in the London metro,
we still take the metro, and we still go on public transport.
But this terrorism works, unlike the other terrorism.
Terrorism works. Alan Dershowitz, an interesting book, on that matter. Yeah, it's very, very effective. Basically, we are people are taken hostage in a whole new manner. I mean, what's also interesting, we have our Rushdie case here with Geert Wilders, who's basically deprived of his privacy. He's deprived of his freedom to move, and probably that will be the case till the end of his life, even even if he dies a natural death. Sure. And what is also interesting in this particular phenomenon, that people tend to deny it, especially government people. They say, that's he is protected, Wilders, and what do you mean?
It's worse than denial. Again, in your book, you make the point of victim blaming. You say that you've talked about the philosopher Charles Taylor and Michael Dummett and various other people who, or Andrew Roberts. So you've listed so many people, I've forgotten all their names, who when Rushdie wrote the novel, or when the Danish fellow did his cartoons, they say, they were unnecessarily provocative. And you make that point very strongly, that a lot of people say, they more or less deserved it.
And you see also that our secret services they make reports, and that's also interesting. I think there is a lot of hypocrisy from the side of the government. They make reports and then they confess that this is a very serious matter, but at the same time you never hear them making a lot of noise about it. No, I mean, they do not, and it's the same with the ministers of justice and security. They never talk about it. They say, we're busy in combating this type of terrorism. They do not make any progress. And also members of parliament, they hardly ever push the matter and say,
we saw this in COVID, didn't we? When suddenly the state flexed its muscles in an incredibly brutal way against the general population.
Right.
But it never does the same similar thing with, for example, immigrant groups who might, be a hotbed of whatever, Islamism or criminality or whatever.
Yeah.
And you make the point, and this was one of the things that I thought was, it was one of the best takeaways from your book on terrorism, is the absolutely intrinsic link between this threat to free speech and multiculturalism. Because of course, it's, if you are, as you say, if you this is what you write, if you are multiculturalist, you accept that there are various different cultures, different religions and so on, and you immediately want to try to prevent anyone from being offended. So there's an absolutely organic link between the two. Yeah, yeah.
It has also tremendous effects on the case law, the European case law, by the way, the case law made by the European Court of Human Rights.
I was going to mention this.
Yeah, that's
well. There's the case of there's a lady, I've forgotten her name, even though I've met her. The lady in Austria, who said Muhammad was a paedophile, and she was convicted in Austria. And that was
Sabatic-Wolf.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Sabatic-Wolf. So her conviction by Austria. For saying this in the name of public order was upheld by the European Court of Human Rights. But when some feminine women simulated the Virgin Mary aborting Jesus Christ on the altar of the Madeleine Church in Paris with a piece of meat, with a piece of liver or something, it's pretty disgusting. They had some minor sentence, I think a suspended sentence. And that was overthrown by the European Court. In other words,
but not this,
the European Court of Human Rights de facto has now got a Muslim blasphemy law, but not a Christian blasphemy law.
Yeah, perhaps it's a matter of interpretation, of course. But if you read that sentence on Sabatic-Wolf. If you read between the lines, then I notice somewhere there that they simply do not have a solution. They think that we're on the brink of a sort of clash of civilizations that they cannot control.
Exactly.
But at the same time, they do not want to confess that.
Exactly.
So it's all very it's a very sycophant way of arguing.
Well, it was in the name of public order that she was convicted by the Austrian authorities.
But I could live with this situation when there would be public officials who would say, well, simply, sorry, Paul, we have no solution. We have to do it. We are being taken hostage. I mean, and on that basis, you can have an honest conversation about the problem. But they simply don't do that. They use all kind of hypocritical reasonings to justify what they do, and that means that also our whole history of case law now is very much tainted by this matter. In 1976, there was the Handyside case. Perhaps you know. Well, there you had the Supreme, you had the European Court saying that information is not only for the information that's well received, but also for ideas that shock, offend, or disturb. Offend, or disturb. It's that. You don't hear that anymore. It's all any kind of offense, even an offense in the eye of the beholder is used now as the final argument of the matter.
My feeling is that the arguments over free speech are often vitiated by the fact, or by assumptions. So people denounce very frequently the Spanish Inquisition, all right? Or they might, under other people, might approve rules or acts that are designed to limit, for example, the spread of Islam. That would be on the other side of the argument. My feeling is that these various positions are simply based on whether or not you believe in the thing in question. So if you don't believe in Catholicism, then you think that the Inquisition was crazy and shouldn't have happened, and vice versa. In other words, it's a bit like you were saying with the judges. In fact, they are pursuing not the law; they're pursuing what they see as a social good.
Yeah.
So, or to put it another way, if you want to have a Catholic state, if you wanted to have a Catholic state, then of course you would have laws to encourage the teaching of the Catholic religion, and similarly laws which would prevent it, and vice versa for Islam. In Islamic republics, that's what they have. So the question is, what kind of society do we want? All right. Do we want a free society? What is the point of freedom? What is the point of free speech?
Yeah.
What is the point? Tell me, what is the point of free speech?
Human flourishing.
Yeah.
Human flourishing. Simply the idea. People are communicative beings. They like to speak out. It's very difficult to live with a situation where you cannot have a conversation and where you have to be. Where you cannot speak out what you think of life. Yeah. So it's human flourishing, and we live in a society now that impedes that flourishing in a.
And whereas, say, take Friedrich Von Hayek emphasized that freedom was a social good, that the maximum number of individual, of course, within a legal order, but the maximum number of individual decisions taken within a legal order would be good for the whole of society. Yeah. Now we saw. I don't know if you agree with me, but in COVID. The way that COVID was managed, it was as if freedom was dangerous, and as if instead collectivism had to be imposed, and anybody who didn't agree or whatever was actually dangerous, was a threat.
It's also the treason of the intellectuals and the scholars is also tremendous. Yeah. I worked for almost 40 years at a law faculty, the Faculty of Leiden, and when all those new restrictions came to the fore, all those new regulations from the EU, where they say, well, there should be no misinformation, no disinformation, and all the arguments that I have taught for those last decades, John Stuart Mill, John Milton, Let Truth and Falsehood Grapple, and all those guys, they vanished from like
that
this.
Was Mill's argument was that you have to let truth go at it against falsehood or disinformation in order to reinvigorate the truth.
I always make the joke, let truth and weppy grapple.
Exactly, and he said. And Mill says that if there isn't a conflict with disinformation or falsehood, then the truth will sort of die. It will not be alive.
And in the slipstream of that crumbling of freedom of speech, you see now a decay of a lot of other liberties, as the freedom of organization, the freedom to organize yourself in a political party. People now talk freely for that. If you have some unpopular views like this party, Forum for Democracy, people say, let's forbid the party, and you hear that also from from people in university positions, scholars, people ruling the university. It's so also academic freedom is in jeopardy nowadays.
Now,
it's strange.
I can't resist asking the questions that everybody asks. You know, what kind of restrictions would you accept? One phrase struck me in one of your I think it was in the book. You said. The criticism of religion should not be stigmatized as racism. All right. Well, what's wrong with racism? From the point of view of free speech. From a
scientific.
No, sorry. I mean, from the point of free speech.
Oh, well,
if I'm a racist and I believe that the white race is superior or whatever, what is wrong with me? Is there anything wrong with me saying that? Because you say it's stigmatized.
Yeah, it's stigmatized. Well, I tend to think that you should have an open discussion on this, and having an open discussion means that you have to. Well, you have to read.
Hold your nose and
exactly. what I know from the theory of race is that ultimately, from a scientific point of view, it doesn't hold water. But to be able to say that, you have to discuss it. Yeah. So I think there should be a broad freedom also to discuss racist ideas and to to read books with racist ideas and discuss those books.
And what about the? I should emphasise, of course, that you, like most liberals, you obviously draw the line at incitement. You draw the line at incitement. You say that incitement to violence.
Incitement to violence
is obviously, as Mill himself said, and so on.
With Khomeini's fatwa as the most
was an incitement, was an act of incitement.
The most clear example. Yeah.
What about what do we think about, or what do you think about acts which are not exactly speech acts? I mentioned the Femen grotesque spectacle on the altar of the Madeleine. That's not a speech act. That's not strictly speaking free speech.
No.
And what about the more recent people who go into art galleries and throw paint over old masters?
That's different.
Okay,
I mean, you destroy the property of someone else. And the Femen ladies should have a broad freedom, but not in the church. I mean, that's the problem.
But why? Because because you're saying, presumably, you think because it's a sacred place.
Not exactly a sacred place, but it's not necessary to desecrate that place. Like you have the right to say that my books are rubbish. Yeah. But you do not have the right to stay right in front of my door with people and it's not necessary.
And can we formulate that in law, in criminal law? Without then going into going into exactly the religious something close to blasphemy laws that you don't want to see.
I tend to think that in the public domain you should have a broad freedom, but there are also limitations in the public domain.
Yes.
But for instance, in books. That people must buy and first read. Page 295. Now I'm offended. That's very strange. That was the Khomeini affair.
Exactly.
But that you shouldn't have all kinds of blasphemous texts at the side of the road, so that people cannot avoid the confrontation with it. I think that's reasonable.
But on the other hand, you see the problem then is that in the Islamic religion, in the Muslim religion, there are no sacred places. So if you accept the argument for Christians, then unfortunately you are going to be drawn into the same problem, exactly the problem that you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Because they don't have sacred places. You can pray anywhere. You can, God is everywhere. There's no sacred and profane. Yeah.
Well, then you could reply, I think, with the privacy argument that at least in your own home, with the door locked, you should be able to read the Satanic Verses by Rushdie. I'm inclined to think. And then it's not on the national television, but in a society somewhere there should be places where you can. It should be able to read the books that you want to read. Yeah. Forbidding a book is one of the most severe intrusions on the freedom of speech, I think, more than for instance a film.
And we've gone from the forbidding of a book, or at least the punishing of the author. More than 30 years ago, to the closing down of TV stations in Europe.
Yeah, right.
I think you have RT and the other, it's an absolutely incredible, absolutely classic example of censorship.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And also totally contrary to John Stuart Mill's approach on liberty, that you should be able to compare.
Exactly.
If the government makes a decision to decide what you have to see, it's a very scary idea. idea that also in the conflict now between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, we only get the information from one side. It's totally mad. And
Are you working on any other books at the moment?
Not on books. I'm very active now in public debate, short pieces, but
But still on the free speech issue. Is that your main?
It's a bit everything now. I'm retired now for half a year, and I'm trying to see what to develop a little bit further.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and maybe we'll have an occasion to see you again. Thanks very much.
Pleasure seeing you.
Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.